The first time Claire Morgan stole my thesis, I helped her do it. Not on purpose. That was the part that kept me awake long after the academic integrity hearing, long after my scholarship disappeared, long after the graduate program withdrew the offer I had spent 4 years building toward. I had helped her because helping Claire had become as automatic as breathing. I edited her seminar papers when she was too overwhelmed to think. I fixed her citations when she forgot where she had found a source. I shared my reading notes because she said she learned better from the way I organized things. I let her sit beside me in the library, let her photograph pages from my notebook, let her use my citation database, let her read early drafts because we were best friends and best friends weren't supposed to keep score. Then, 3 days before our senior thesis workshop, she copied my research question, my argument, my literature map, my coded dataset, and almost 30 pages of my draft. She submitted first. By the time I uploaded my own work, the system flagged me as the second person to submit substantially identical material. Claire cried in Professor Pierce's office. She said she had trusted me. She said I must have taken her paper from the shared folder after she let me read it. She even apologized for being careless enough to leave her work where I could access it. The performance was so convincing that, for one horrible second, I wondered whether I had lost my mind. Then the consequences came. My thesis grade was frozen. My honors designation was suspended pending review. The scholarship that covered my final semester required good academic standing, so the next disbursement was held. The graduate program that had offered me admission requested an explanation. My faculty recommender withdrew her letter until the investigation was complete. My campus job could not cover rent and tuition together. I moved out of my apartment and slept on my mother's couch while working double shifts at a 24-hour grocery store. Claire graduated. Not with highest honors, because the university eventually determined that the 2 papers had unresolved authorship issues. But she graduated. I did not. The formal appeal took 7 months. By then the fellowship deadline had passed, my graduate offer was gone, and Professor Pierce had accepted a position at another university. The appeal panel eventually changed my record from academic misconduct to insufficient evidence to determine authorship. That sentence was supposed to be mercy. It felt like a second conviction. For the next 4 years, I took whatever work I could get while trying to repair a record that no longer showed the person I had been before the accusation. Every application forced me to explain the delayed degree and the lost semester. Claire went to graduate school and later published work built from the thesis she had taken. At 27, after months of overwork in a research coordinator job, I collapsed beside the office printer. An undiagnosed heart rhythm disorder had been giving me warning signs for years. I had ignored all of them because I was too busy proving I could recover. I died angry. Not because Claire had one. Because I had spent my whole life making it easy for people to take from me and then calling that kindness. When I opened my eyes again, my cheek was pressed against a sociology textbook. My neck hurt. My laptop hummed in front of me. A mug of coffee had gone cold beside my elbow. The date in the lower corner read March 6th. My hands began to shake. Not delicately. Not in the cinematic way people describe fear after it is over. My fingers knocked against the edge of the laptop hard enough to make the screen wobble. March 6th. I knew that date. I knew the scratch on the desk. I knew the blue sweater hanging from the back of my chair. I knew the half-finished bag of pretzels on the floor. And I knew the document open on my screen. The cost of convenience, dynamic scheduling, and the transfer of risk to hourly workers. My senior thesis. The thesis Claire had stolen. I stopped breathing. A notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Claire, still awake? Another followed. Claire, I'm dying over this stupid workshop draft. Then, Claire, send me your outline again? Mine is a mess and Pierce is going to destroy me tomorrow, lol. My stomach folded in on itself. In my first life, I had replied within 2 minutes. I had sent her my outline. Then, because she called and sounded panicked, I had shared the full draft too. She told me she only wanted to see how I had structured the literature review. I remembered sitting exactly where I was sitting now, laughing when she said, "You're basically my emergency academic support animal." I had thought it was affectionate. By morning, she had copied everything. This was the night. Not weeks before. Not some vague point in the past where I would have to wait for fate to catch up. The night. My pulse thudded against my throat. I stared at Claire's message until the letters blurred. Then I looked at my thesis. 31 pages. 4 months of work. A coded dataset built from public labor arbitration summaries. 312 cases, manually categorized by scheduling notice, employer discretion, lost hours, childcare conflict, transportation burden, and disciplinary consequence. A literature review I could have defended in my sleep. An argument I believed in. In my first life, losing it had felt like having part of my brain cut out of me. I wanted to protect it. I wanted to lock every file, send myself certified copies, email Professor Pierce at midnight, call Claire and scream that I knew what she was about to do. Then I remembered the hearing. Claire sitting across the table in a gray cardigan, dabbing tears from the corner of her eye. She's had access to my work for months, she had said. I never imagined she would use it against me. And I remembered the committee member asking me why, if I had believed the work was mine, I had shared so much material with Claire without any clear record of boundaries. The question had enraged me. Now I understood what mattered inside it. Not blame. Position. In my first life, Claire's plan had worked because I had stood exactly where she expected me to stand. Same topic. Same sources. Same draft. Same shared folder. Same habit of answering every emergency. If I fought her over the old thesis, I would still be trapped inside the structure she had already prepared to exploit. I looked at the document title again. Then I closed it. The movement was so small it almost felt ridiculous. My entire first life had collapsed because of that thesis. Now I minimized it like an old receipt. Claire messaged again. Claire, Elena. Claire, seriously, I just need the structure. I opened a blank document. For 10 minutes, I sat without touching the keyboard. Then I typed a new working title. Merit by the Deadline, How Scholarship Renewal Rules Shape Course Choices Among Working Students. I read it once. My hands were still shaking. But something inside me had gone very quiet. I had spent the previous life wishing I could prove the old thesis was mine. This time, I was not going to stand beside Claire and argue over who owned a stolen house. I was going to move. I opened the university's public scholarship policy archive. Then the registrar's publicly available course load reports. Then institutional research summaries on withdrawal rates and credit hour completion. I started a new folder on my laptop. I named it March 6_new_thesis. I did not share it with anyone. I created a fresh citation library. I exported the first batch of sources to a timestamped file. I emailed myself a 1-paragraph research memo from my university account. Not because I was trying to manufacture evidence. Because I had finally learned that work should leave a trail. At 11:43 p.m. Claire called. I watched the phone ring. My body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened. My thumb moved toward the answer button. For years, Claire's urgency had been a command I obeyed automatically. If she panicked, I fixed. If she forgot, I remembered. If she missed a deadline, I found a workaround. The phone kept vibrating. I let it stop. 30 seconds later, she called again. I turned the phone face down. A new message appeared. Claire, are you mad at me or something? Then, Claire, I literally just need 10 minutes. I typed a response. Sorry. I'm changing my thesis direction tonight and I need to focus. I won't be able to review your draft. I stared at the words. They looked rude. That was my first instinct. Not dangerous. Not cruel. Rude. My mother had spent years teaching me that being dependable mattered. Claire had spent years teaching me that dependable meant available. I sent the message. The little delivery mark appeared. Nothing happened. No lightning. No one burst into the room and accused me of being selfish. I breathed out. A minute later, the typing bubble appeared. Claire, changing it? Claire, the night before workshop? Claire, why would you do that? I almost smiled. Not because I was happy. Because I could hear the first crack in her plan. I replied, I realized I'm more interested in scholarship policy and working students. I'll explain tomorrow. The typing bubble appeared again, vanished, returned. Claire, but your old topic was good. Claire, Pierce loved it. Claire, you already did all that data work. There it was. Concern that was a little too specific. In my first life, I had found it flattering that Claire remembered details about my project. Now I wondered how long she had been measuring them. I wrote, I know. I'm still changing it. No answer came for almost 5 minutes. Then, Claire, okay. Weird but okay. I set the phone aside. At 12:18 a.m. I removed Claire's access from the old shared research folder. That folder contained article PDFs and several early notes I had once shared with her because our topics overlapped. It did not contain the latest thesis draft. Not yet. But in my first life, after her call, I had uploaded it there for convenience. This time, I checked the access history before changing permissions. Claire had opened the folder at 10:52 p.m. Then again at 11:06. Then 3 more times in the last hour. My skin prickled. She already had something. Maybe enough. I exported the access log provided by the platform and saved it with the rest of my records. Then I did something that would have terrified the old version of me. I left the old thesis alone. I did not edit it. I did not delete it. I did not add warnings or traps. I simply moved on. By 2 in the morning, I had a new research question, a preliminary bibliography, and a 6-page concept memo. By 4, I had built a table comparing scholarship renewal rules across 12 anonymized institutions from public policy manuals. By 5, my eyes burned so badly I could barely focus. I crawled into bed without changing clothes. My alarm went off at 7:30. For one disorienting moment, I expected to be 27 again, late for the non-profit job that had worked me into the ground. Then I saw my dorm room. My laptop. My old blue sweater. And the new title on the screen. I was 21. Claire had not ruined me yet. I got up. The senior thesis workshop met at 10. At 9:42, I walked into Caldwell Hall carrying a printed copy of my new 6-page memo and nothing else. Claire was already there. She sat near the center of the seminar table in a cream blouse, one ankle crossed over the other, laughing with 2 students from our cohort. A thick stack of paper rested in front of her. My old thesis. I knew it before I saw the title. The margins were wrong. The paragraph spacing was mine. Even the small indentation before block quotes was the setting I had used since sophomore year. My chest tightened so hard I had to stop walking. For a second, I was back in the hearing room. Claire crying. Professor Pierce looking exhausted. My mother waiting outside because family members were not allowed in the preliminary meeting. Then Claire looked up and saw me. Her smile widened. Elena. Finally. She tapped the chair beside her. I sat across the table instead. Her smile changed by less than an inch. You okay? Just tired. You were up all night, weren't you? She tilted her head. Doing that new topic? Yes. One of our classmates, Mateo, looked between us. New topic? Tonight? Last night. Claire laughed lightly. She decided to burn down 4 months of work at midnight. Completely normal behavior. A few people smiled. I opened my folder. Claire's gaze dropped to the first page. I watched the exact moment she read the title. Her fingers stopped moving. She had been smoothing the corner of her paper with her thumb. Now her hands simply rested there. Her eyes moved across the words once. Then again. Merit by the deadline, how scholarship renewal rules shape course choices among working students. The color did not dramatically drain from her face. Nothing that theatrical happened. She just looked at the page too long. Then she glanced at the thick paper in front of her. Then back at mine. What happened to scheduling algorithms? She asked. I changed my mind. Her mouth opened. Professor Naomi Pierce entered before she could say anything else. She was carrying a travel mug and a folder full of marked papers. Morning. I hope everyone brought enough caffeine to survive peer workshop. Chairs shifted. Laptops opened. Professor Pierce set her things down and looked around the table. We're doing 4 presentations today. 10 minutes each, then critique. Morgan, Brooks, Alvarez, Chin. Claire's shoulders loosened when she heard she was first. Of course they did. That had been part of the first life too. Claire presented before me. She had always believed going first made her look confident. Professor Pierce nodded toward her. Claire, you're up. Claire stood. She distributed copies of her draft. One landed in front of me. I looked at the title. The Cost of Convenience, Dynamic Scheduling and the Transfer of Risk to Hourly Workers. Word for word. My old title. Not similar. Not inspired by. Mine. Under it was her name. Claire Morgan. For a moment, the room narrowed to that line. Then Claire began speaking. My thesis argues that contemporary scheduling systems don't merely create inconvenience for hourly workers. They transfer operational risk from firms to employees by making workers absorb uncertainty in hours, childcare, transportation, and income. My sentence. She had not even changed the verbs. I put both hands flat on the table. Across from me, Mateo circled something on the first page. Professor Pierce listened with the focused stillness she used when she was genuinely interested. Claire moved through the literature review. My categories. My case selection. My coding framework. Even my awkward phrase temporal volatility as privatized risk, which I had planned to revise because it sounded like I was trying too hard. The old me would have interrupted. I knew that with total certainty. I would have accused her right there. I would have demanded that she explain. And because the room would have seen two young women making competing claims over the same work, the question would have become messy before the evidence had shape. So I listened. Claire reached page 14. There was the citation error. Henderson, 2018. It should have been Hendricks, 2017. I had corrected it in my private notes 2 days earlier, but not yet in the draft version Claire had apparently copied. She read the sentence without hesitation. I wrote a small dot beside the citation on my copy. Nothing more. When she finished, Professor Pierce leaned back. This is substantially more developed than the proposal you showed me last week. Claire smiled. I had a productive weekend. My heartbeat changed. Last week, Professor Pierce had seen a different proposal. That mattered. What changed? Professor Pierce asked. Claire hesitated for half a beat. I realized my earlier angle was too broad. And the dataset? I built it over the weekend. Professor Pierce looked at the methods section. 312 arbitration summaries? Yes. Mateo let out a low whistle. Over a weekend? Claire gave him a practiced grin. I didn't sleep much. I looked down at my hands so no one would see the reaction in my face. In my first life, Claire had never needed to explain that jump because no one knew what to compare it against. This time, Professor Pierce had seen her earlier work. The first crack had widened. Professor Pierce made a note. All right. We'll come back to methodology. Peer comments? The class discussed scope, coding reliability, theoretical framing. No one accused anyone of anything. No one needed to. Then Professor Pierce turned to me. Elena. I stood and passed out my 6-page memo. Claire did not touch hers at first. Her eyes stayed on me. I began. My new project looks at a different kind of institutional time pressure. I'm studying scholarship renewal policies and how credit hour requirements may shape course-taking decisions among students who work substantial hours during the academic year. Professor Pierce raised her eyebrows. New project? Yes. I changed directions last night. Completely? Completely. She flipped through the pages. That is a significant pivot this late. I know. What prompted it? I could feel Claire watching. I chose my words carefully. I realized I needed a project I could complete independently from this point forward. I also found a policy archive I wanted to work with, and once I started mapping the renewal rules, the question became clearer. Independently. Professor Pierce looked at me for a second longer than usual. Then she nodded. All right. Walk us through what you have. I did. The new project was rough. It had gaps. It was nowhere near as polished as the paper Claire had just presented under her name. That helped me. I was not pretending I had magically produced a finished thesis overnight. I had a credible new direction, a source trail, and a plan. When I finished, Professor Pierce asked hard questions. I answered what I could and admitted what I could not. Claire said nothing until the end. Then she leaned forward. I'm just confused. Professor Pierce looked at her. About? Claire tapped my memo. Elena and I have talked about thesis ideas for months. Like, constantly. And she was working on basically the same scheduling topic I'm doing now. So I'm surprised she suddenly changed the night before workshop. The room went still in a normal way. Not dramatic. People simply stopped shuffling papers. Professor Pierce looked at me. Is that accurate? Yes. My previous topic was dynamic scheduling. Claire let out a small breath, almost a laugh. Right. So, I changed it. She stared at me. Professor Pierce's gaze moved from me to Claire's thick draft. Then back. Were the two of you collaborating? No, I said. Claire answered at the same time. We brainstormed together all the time. The overlap between our voices landed heavily. Professor Pierce's expression tightened. Those are not the same answer. Claire turned toward me. Elena, come on. We shared sources. We sometimes discussed sources. You sent me articles. I did. And notes. Early reading notes, yes. Her eyes sharpened. I could almost hear the calculation. She needed me to admit enough shared work that authorship would become muddy. In my first life, I had done exactly that. I had rushed to prove we were close because I thought closeness proved betrayal. Instead, it had given Claire room to claim collaboration. Professor Pierce set down her pen. I'm going to stop this conversation here. Claire, Elena, I want both of you to email me by noon with a brief description of your prior thesis development and any shared materials relevant to the overlap. Do not delete or alter files. Do not contact each other about the substance of those records until I tell you otherwise. Claire's face changed. Not fear exactly. Annoyance. Like a door had closed before she was ready. Professor Pierce continued. This may be nothing more than informal idea sharing that became too close. Or it may require a formal review. I'm not making a conclusion in class. Then she looked directly at me. And Elena, because you changed topics, I still need to understand what your prior work contained. Of course. I meant it. For the first time, I was not afraid of showing my trail. When class ended, Claire caught me in the hallway before I reached the stairs. Elena. I kept walking. She grabbed my sleeve. The contact sent a flash of old fear through me so fast I almost jerked away. Not because she had ever hit me. Because in the first life, so many conversations had begun exactly like this, Claire touching my arm, lowering her voice, making a crisis feel private enough that I would solve it for her. I stopped and looked at her hand. She let go. What? Her eyes searched my face. What are you doing? I'm going to the library. You know what I mean. Students moved around us toward the stairwell. Claire waited until two people passed before speaking again. Why did you say we weren't collaborating? Because we weren't. She laughed once, quietly. Are you serious? Yes. We studied together all semester. We studied together. That doesn't make my thesis yours. Something flickered behind her eyes. There it was. Not guilt. Recognition. She knew I knew. Maybe not how much. Maybe not why. But the version of me standing in front of her was no longer following the script. She lowered her voice further. Did you read my draft before class? No. You looked weird when I presented. I was tired. Elena. Her smile vanished. If you're trying to make this into some accusation because you changed your topic, don't. We have always shared ideas. You know that. I held her gaze. Professor Pierce told us not to discuss the substance of the records. For the first time, Claire looked genuinely startled. You're hiding behind that? I'm following an instruction. That is not how friends talk to each other. The sentence landed with almost no force. In my first life, it would have worked immediately. I would have apologized. I would have explained. I would have tried to reassure her that I wasn't accusing her, even while my own work sat under her name. Now I heard the mechanism inside the words. Friendship, to Claire, was a door I was never allowed to lock. I'll see you later, I said. Her mouth tightened. Fine. I walked away. My knees felt weak by the time I reached the next building. Rebirth had not made me brave. It had only made certain forms of cowardice too expensive to repeat. At the library, I found a desk on the 4th floor and opened my laptop. Professor Pierce's email arrived at 10:58. The subject line read, Documentation Request, Thesis Development. The message was careful and procedural. She asked each of us to provide, separately, a timeline of topic development, copies of any proposals previously submitted to her, relevant draft files with metadata intact, a description of materials intentionally shared between us, and any communication that might clarify how our topics had converged. She also wrote that neither of us was being formally accused at that stage. I remembered how much that sentence had mattered to me in the first life. Back then, I had already felt accused by the time anyone told me I wasn't. This time, I began with facts. My original topic had started in November after a labor economics lecture. I had created the first note file on November 18th. I had sent Professor Pierce a one-page concept paragraph on December 2nd. She had replied with 3 articles and a comment that my question was promising but needed a narrower definition of scheduling instability. In January, I built the case database. On January 21st, I had sent Claire a link to a folder containing 6 journal articles because she said she was considering a workplace inequality topic too. On February 3rd, I had shared a 2-page reading map after she asked how I was organizing the literature. On February 14th, she had asked to see my coding categories. I sent her a screenshot. On February 27th, she asked whether I could review her own thesis proposal. Her topic then was employee wellness programs and turnover. I knew because I still had the file. It was called Claire_proposal_V3. I opened it. The research question had nothing to do with dynamic scheduling. Nothing. I stared at the creation date. February 26th. 9 days ago. In the first life, that file had disappeared from the shared folder after the accusation began. I had not thought to preserve it. Now it was still in my downloads. I copied it into a read-only evidence folder without altering the original. Then I looked through our messages. There were hundreds. Most were ordinary. Memes. Lunch plans. Complaints about professors. Photos of badly made coffee. A message from October when Claire stayed with me in the emergency room while my mother was treated for a severe migraine. That memory hurt more than I expected. Claire had done kind things for me. Real things. That was why I had trusted her. People like to believe betrayal announces itself in retrospect. It does not. Sometimes it sits beside you in a plastic hospital chair at 2 in the morning and brings you a vending machine granola bar because you forgot to eat. Sometimes it remembers your birthday. Sometimes it helps you move. And sometimes it decides that the value of your work matters less than what it can gain by taking it. I kept scrolling. February 14th. Claire, your coding categories are so clean OMG. Me, thanks. Took forever. Claire, send me the spreadsheet structure? Not the data, just headers. Me, sure. Then February 27th. Claire, can you look at my wellness proposal before Pierce sees it? Me, send it. Claire, you are literally the reason I'm graduating. I had reacted with a laughing emoji. My throat tightened. March 4th. Claire, scheduling thing is way more interesting than mine TBH. Me, then maybe bring scheduling into your discussion section? But careful not to make it too broad. Claire, yours is still different though, right? Me, yes. Mine is specifically arbitration outcomes and risk transfer. I stopped. There. A line so ordinary I had forgotten it existed. Mine is specifically arbitration outcomes and risk transfer. A direct statement of ownership, 2 days before Claire presented the same framework as hers. I exported the message thread using the platform's built-in archive function. Then I took screenshots showing the dates and surrounding context. At 11:42, I began writing my timeline. I did not embellish. I did not call Claire a thief. I wrote what I had created, what I had shared, and when. At 11:57, I attached Professor Pierce's December email about my original concept. At 11:59, I sent everything. Then I closed the laptop and pressed both palms over my face. Only then did I realize I was crying. Quietly. Not from fear. From the strange grief of watching my younger self leave evidence everywhere without understanding she might someday need it. She had not been stupid. She had been trusting. There was a difference. I let myself cry for 2 minutes. Then I opened the new thesis. The best thing I could do for my future was not spend the entire day staring at Claire's crime. It was work on something that belonged only to me. By 3, I had expanded the policy table and drafted a short method section. At 3:18, Professor Pierce emailed again. Elena, thank you. I have received your materials. Please preserve the originals and do not alter relevant files or message threads. I may need to refer this to the department's academic integrity liaison after reviewing both submissions. Do not discuss this with Claire beyond logistical matters. We will speak tomorrow. I read it twice. Then my phone buzzed. Claire. Claire, did you send Pierce screenshots of our messages? I did not answer. Claire, Elena, this is getting ridiculous. Then, Claire, we both know we talked about that topic together. Then, Claire, if she thinks I copied you because you suddenly changed topics, that is not fair. I placed the phone on silent. 20 minutes later, another message appeared. Claire, call me. Then, Claire, please. Then, Claire, I'm freaking out. My chest tightened automatically. That phrase had controlled me for years. I'm freaking out. It had meant drop what you are doing. Fix me. Absorb this. I typed a response and deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally I wrote, Professor Pierce asked us not to discuss the records. I'm going to follow that. Claire called immediately. I declined. She called again. I declined again. The third time, I turned off my phone. For the rest of the afternoon, I worked. The next morning, Professor Pierce asked me to meet her at 8:30. Her office smelled like coffee and dry erase marker. She closed the door after I entered. Sit. I sat. There was a folder on her desk. Claire's name was written on one tab. Mine on another. Professor Pierce folded her hands. I want to be very precise. I am not deciding authorship today. I am telling you that the overlap is serious enough that I am referring the matter to Dr. Samuel Reed, our departmental academic integrity liaison. I nodded. Claire provided a timeline last night. It differs substantially from yours. My stomach tightened. In what way? She says she began the dynamic scheduling topic in early January. She says the two of you discussed it repeatedly and that you later adopted several elements of her framework. I felt the old panic rise like heat under my skin. In the first life, that claim had been devastating because Claire had submitted first and I had no clean alternative project. Now I forced myself to breathe. What did she provide to support January? Professor Pierce watched me carefully. I cannot disclose all of her materials to you outside the process. You will have an opportunity to review relevant evidence if a formal case is opened. Okay. She also says you had access to her files through a shared folder. That is true. We both had access to some shared materials. Did you ever see a dynamic scheduling thesis draft under her name before yesterday? No. Did you ever edit one? No. Did you ever give her language that appears in the current draft? I thought carefully. I sent her early reading notes and a screenshot of my coding headers. We discussed sources. I did not give her permission to use my thesis language, dataset, argument, or structure as her own. Professor Pierce nodded. That distinction matters. She pulled a paper from the folder. One more question. Do you recognize this phrase, temporal volatility, as privatized risk? I almost laughed. Yes. Why? Because I wrote it and I hate it. Her eyebrows lifted. You hate it? It sounds inflated. I marked it for revision in my notes. When? 2 days ago, I think. Do you have that note? Yes. She leaned back. Preserve it. I nodded. Professor Pierce's voice softened slightly. Elena, I also need to address your topic change. You are allowed to change your thesis direction. You are not required to remain in a disputed project. But switching this late creates real academic risk. You have 6 weeks. I know. If you do this, I need to see steady progress. You will. I am not promising the integrity review will disappear simply because you changed topics. I understand. She studied me. You look calmer than I expected. I almost told her I had already lived through the worst possible version of this conversation. Instead I said, I'm trying to stay with what I can prove. That is wise. When I left her office, Claire was standing by the stairwell. I should not have been surprised. She had probably seen me enter. She walked toward me. Can we please stop acting insane? I kept a few feet between us. Professor Pierce told us not to discuss the case. I'm not discussing the case. I'm discussing us. We are part of the case. Her nostrils flared. You know I would never steal from you. The sentence was so cleanly delivered that I understood why everyone had believed her before. I looked at her. Then the records will show that. She went still. That's it? What do you want me to say? I want you to tell Pierce we developed the idea together. There it was. Direct now. No more warm fog around the request. You want me to say something I don't believe is true. I want you to stop pretending our work happened in separate universes. We discussed ideas. That isn't co-authorship. Do you hear yourself? She snapped, then immediately lowered her voice when two students passed. You sent me sources. You sent me your coding categories. You commented on my proposal. I commented on yours. You commented that the title was too long. That still counts as collaboration. No. It counts as friendship. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Claire said, you changed your topic because you knew mine was stronger. The accusation was so strange I almost missed its purpose. She was testing a new story. One where I had seen her superior work, panicked, and abandoned my own similar paper to avoid comparison. Is that what you told Professor Pierce? Her eyes flickered. I told her the truth. Good. I walked away. She called after me. Elena, if this turns into a formal accusation, it can hurt both of us. I stopped. Not because she had scared me. Because I remembered another sentence from the first life. We can both lose everything if you keep pushing this. Back then, I had heard concern. Now I heard leverage. I turned around. If the facts hurt both of us, then they hurt both of us. Her face hardened. That afternoon, Dr. Reed emailed us separately. A formal preliminary review had been opened. Neither of us was yet charged with misconduct, but the department would preserve submitted files, request version histories from the university cloud system, and compare our prior proposals and current drafts. We were instructed not to delete, modify, or backdate any relevant work. I read that line twice. Then I remembered something. The university cloud system. In my first life, I had assumed version history would save me. It had helped, but not enough. Why? Because my final draft had been stored locally for weeks before I uploaded it to the shared system. Claire's copied version had appeared online first. The cloud history showed her file earlier than mine even though my local file was older. The committee had treated my laptop metadata as less reliable because local timestamps could theoretically be altered. That had been one reason the case became insufficient evidence. This time, however, Professor Pierce's December email existed. My February message existed. Claire's old wellness proposal existed. And there was more. The case database. I opened the spreadsheet. Each arbitration summary had a source identifier. The identifiers matched a reading log I kept in a separate citation manager. That manager automatically recorded import dates. I scrolled back. January 9th. January 11th. January 13th. Dozens of source imports over 6 weeks. Claire could copy the finished spreadsheet. She could copy the categories. But if she claimed she had independently built the dataset, where was her source trail? I exported the citation history. Then I opened my handwritten notebook. On January 17th, I had written a note beside one case. MOPS? Maybe manager-owned predictability shift, terrible acronym, do not use. I laughed out loud. MOPS. A ridiculous private shorthand I had never intended to appear anywhere. Then I remembered page 22 of Claire's draft. She had a sentence, this pattern can be understood as a manager-owned predictability shift. No acronym. But the phrase was there. A phrase I had invented, disliked, and never discussed with her. I photographed the notebook page with the date visible and added it to my records. Again, not a trap. Not fabricated proof. Just the ordinary archaeology of my own work. The next 3 days were an exercise in doing 2 lives at once. In one life, I attended classes, worked 12 hours a week at the campus writing center, called my mother, ate with Tessa, and built a new thesis from scratch. In the other, I watched Claire's story change. On Friday, she told Dr. Reed that our dynamic scheduling idea had emerged from a shared conversation in January. On Monday, after being shown my December email to Professor Pierce, she amended that statement and said she had been considering the topic independently before we discussed it. On Tuesday, she produced a document she claimed was a January brainstorming memo. I did not see the document yet, but Dr. Reed asked whether I recognized any of its language. I told him I could not answer without viewing it. He said I would get that opportunity if the matter advanced. Claire also began telling classmates that our projects had always been collaborative. I refused to recruit people to my side. If anyone was formally asked what they remembered, I wanted them to give the department their own memory, not a version shaped by me. That evening, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, baby." My throat closed. In my first life, during the worst months of the investigation, I had stopped telling her things because every bad update made her worry about money. Then her hours were cut, and I moved home, and our relationship became a constant exchange of apologies neither of us owed. Now her voice was warm and ordinary. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. I smiled through tears she could not see. "How do you know something's wrong?" "You only call before dinner when you are upset or need a recipe." "I don't need a recipe." "Then talk." I told her the simple version. There was an authorship dispute around my old thesis topic. I had changed topics. The department was reviewing records. I had documentation. I was okay. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you need me to come there?" The question nearly broke me. "No." "Do you need money?" "No." "Do you need me to call somebody and embarrass you?" I laughed. "No." "Good. Because I could do that last one for free." I wiped my eyes. "Mom, if something happens with my scholarship, Elena." I stopped. "You are not going to make financial decisions in advance because you are scared. We will deal with facts when we have facts." I stared at the wall. Facts when we have facts. I wrote the sentence on a sticky note after we hung up. It became my rule for the next week. On March 14th, Dr. Reed formally notified both of us that the preliminary review had found sufficient concerns to open an academic integrity case involving possible plagiarism and misrepresentation of authorship. Importantly, the notice did not accuse me of plagiarism. It listed both of us as involved students because authorship had to be determined. My stomach still dropped when I read it. A case number. A hearing date. The language looked too much like the documents from my first life. My hands went cold. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. Tessa looked over from her desk. "What?" I handed her the laptop. She read the email. "This says they're investigating, not that you did anything." "I know." "You don't look like you know." I pressed my fingertips against my forehead. The room had started to tilt. For a few seconds, I was 27 again, then 21, then both. I could hear the grocery store freezer hum from the first life. I could smell the hearing room's stale carpet. I could see my mother opening a tuition bill at the kitchen table. Tessa stood and put both hands on my shoulders. "Elena. Look at me." I did. "Do you have evidence?" "Yes." "Did you steal her paper?" "No." Then breathe like someone who has to be functional for the next hour. It was such a Tessa sentence that I laughed despite myself. The panic receded enough for me to sit. Rebirth did not erase trauma. It gave me a second chance to respond differently when it returned. I forwarded the hearing notice to the Student Legal Support Office and requested an appointment. Not because I expected a lawyer to magically solve the case. Because I had learned what happens when fear makes you improvise inside a formal process. The office assigned me an academic advocate named Priya Shah, a third-year law student supervised by a licensed attorney. At our first meeting, she read the notice, then asked me to explain the timeline without adjectives. No, she obviously stole it, Priya said. Give me events. I liked her immediately. I gave her events. When I finished, she tapped her pen against the legal pad. You have a potentially strong authorship record. But don't make the mistake of thinking one good timestamp wins everything. I know. Good. We need independent categories of proof. Development history. Access history. Substantive fingerprints in the work. And credibility. Credibility meaning who lies better? Credibility meaning whose story survives contact with documents. That sentence steadied me. Priya helped me request the case file materials I was entitled to review. 3 days later, the university released Claire's submitted evidence. I opened it in Priya's office. The first item was Claire's January brainstorming memo. The document looked convincing. It was dated January 8th. It contained a paragraph about dynamic scheduling, childcare instability, and transportation burdens. It even included a rough version of my risk transfer argument. My pulse kicked hard. In the first life, evidence like this had destroyed me. How do we know if the date is real? I asked. Priya shook her head. We don't assume it isn't. We examine provenance. The memo had only been uploaded after the dispute began, so its local January creation date could not settle the question. More important was what surrounded it. My December email already contained the same core language. My research account showed a continuous source trail through January and February. Claire's recent wellness proposal showed a completely different project. And her claimed evidence of collaboration mostly consisted of ordinary peer feedback I had never hidden. Priya kept bringing me back to the same rule: no single timestamp had to carry the case. The question was whether the development history, access history, substantive fingerprints, and each person's story pointed in the same direction. Claire also submitted a character statement from her father, who served on an alumni advisory council. Priya reminded me that influence could feel intimidating without being evidence, and that the hearing panel would be drawn from faculty outside our immediate dispute. The hearing was scheduled for March 22nd. 9 days away. During those 9 days, my new thesis grew. That mattered more than I expected. Every time the case threatened to consume my identity, I returned to the policy table. I found that scholarship renewal rules clustered around credit completion thresholds that looked neutral but could punish students who reduced course loads to accommodate work. I narrowed the project to public institutional policies and archived student handbook language, avoiding any need for human subject interviews this late in the semester. Professor Pierce approved the revised scope. She marked my first 10 pages with brutal comments. Define working student. Do not imply causation from policy text alone. Separate incentive structure from observed behavior. I loved every red mark. They were criticism of work that was mine. No one else's name hovered over it. On March 19th, Claire tried one more time to pull me outside the process. She waited near the writing center at the end of my shift. Rain streaked the windows behind her. She looked exhausted. For the first time in years, her hair was tied back without care, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Elena, please. I stopped several feet away. You shouldn't be here. I know. Then why are you? Because this is insane. She looked around the nearly empty hallway. Reed is asking about my old proposal. Pierce gave them the wellness draft. That makes sense. No, it doesn't. It was a preliminary idea. It shows what you were working on 9 days before you submitted the scheduling paper. Her face tightened. You think that proves something? I think the panel decides what it proves. She took a breath. Tell them we developed the topic together, and I'll tell them the paper language came from our shared notes. Then nobody has to be the villain. For a second, I heard the sophistication in it. Not confess. Not withdraw the paper. Mutualize the authorship. Turn theft into blurred collaboration. If I agreed, Claire might escape a plagiarism finding. I might escape suspicion too. It was exactly the kind of compromise the first version of me would have grabbed because it promised immediate relief. But it would also make a lie permanent. No. Her eyes filled. Why are you doing this to me? The question was so familiar that it almost felt scripted. I answered slowly. I changed my topic. I preserved my records. I answered the department's questions. Those are the things I am doing. You know what I mean. I do. Then answer me. I looked at her. You are asking me to protect you from the consequences of a paper you submitted. Her mouth tightened. You always act like everything is so simple. No. I used to make everything complicated enough that I could excuse it. She stared at me. Then she said, very quietly, you can write another thesis. I felt something inside me settle. Not break. Settle. That's what you believe, isn't it? Claire's eyes moved away. You can. You already are. And that made mine available to take? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Her voice sharpened. You have always had options. You're the one professors notice. You're the one who can sit down at midnight and produce 6 pages of a new project. If I lose this fellowship nomination, I don't have another path. You have a degree. My father expects graduate school. That is not my debt. She flinched. For years, I had mistaken Claire's pressure for fragility. Now I saw the entitlement inside it. Her fear was real. So was the conclusion she had built from it, because she had more to lose socially, I should lose materially. She stepped closer. Do you even care what happens to me? I answered truthfully. Yes. Her face softened for 1 second. Then I continued. But caring is not the same as taking responsibility for it. I walked past her. She did not follow. The hearing took place on a Wednesday afternoon in a conference room on the administration building's 3rd floor. There were no dramatic rows of spectators. No courtroom benches. No audience waiting to gasp at the right moment. Just a rectangular table, a wall clock, pitchers of water, and 3 panel members who had clearly read too many pages before lunch. That ordinariness made it more frightening. Real consequences rarely arrived with music. Priya sat beside me as my student advocate. Across the table, Claire sat with an advisor from the same student support office. Professor Pierce was there as a witness, not a decision-maker. Dr. Reed presented the department's evidence summary. The panel chair, Professor Elaine Foster from the History Department, began by explaining the standard of review. The panel was not deciding who was the better person. It was deciding whether academic work had been misrepresented, whether plagiarism had occurred, and whether either student had knowingly submitted work that was not substantially her own. Facts when we have facts. I kept my hands around a paper cup of water so no one would see them tremble. Dr. Reed started with chronology. December 2nd, I emailed Professor Pierce a concept memo describing scheduling instability as a transfer of operational uncertainty from firms to workers. December 4th, Professor Pierce replied with suggested readings. January 9th through February 24th, my university-linked citation account synchronized an expanding collection of sources on scheduling practices, labor arbitration, childcare instability, transportation burden, and worker discipline. January 21st, I shared 6 articles with Claire. February 3rd, I shared a reading map. February 14th, I shared a screenshot of coding categories. February 26th, Claire created a proposal on employee wellness programs and turnover. February 27th, she sent that proposal to me for feedback. March 4th, our messages showed Claire telling me my scheduling project was way more interesting than hers. March 6th, Claire accessed the old shared research folder repeatedly late at night. March 7th, she presented a 31-page dynamic scheduling draft in workshop. March 7th, I presented a new 6-page concept memo on scholarship renewal policy. Dr. Reed paused. Then he placed 2 documents side by side on the screen. My December concept email. Claire's claimed January brainstorming memo. The same core phrase appeared in both. Operational uncertainty externalized downward. Claire's advisor leaned toward her and whispered something. Professor Foster looked at Claire. Ms. Morgan, can you explain how that phrase appears in your January memo? Claire swallowed. It was an idea I had been thinking about. Before January? Yes. Do you have a record predating Ms. Brooks's December email? Not a formal one. Any notes? Messages? Earlier drafts? I brainstorm mostly on paper. Did you provide those notes? I couldn't find them. Professor Foster nodded without reacting. Then came the old wellness proposal. Claire shifted in her chair. Her advisor asked the panel to recognize that students could change topics rapidly. Professor Foster agreed. Of course they can. Ms. Brooks did exactly that. The question is not whether a change is possible. The question is the development trail associated with the submitted work. That sentence mattered. My overnight pivot did not make Claire guilty. Her overnight transformation did not make her guilty either. What mattered was what each of us could connect to the work we claimed. Dr. Reed moved to the dataset. He displayed my source log beside the dataset structure found in Claire's paper. The categories matched. Not merely common categories such as hours and wages. They included 2 unusual distinctions I had developed after reading dozens of cases: voluntary schedule acceptance versus coerced acceptance, and what I called downstream dependency conflict, a clumsy label for childcare or transportation problems triggered by late changes. Professor Foster asked Claire how she had created those categories. Claire looked down at her notes. Through the arbitration summaries. Which summaries led you to downstream dependency conflict? Claire hesitated. I don't remember specific cases. Can you identify a source where that term is used? No. It was my own coding phrase. My heartbeat thudded once, hard. Dr. Reed opened a photograph of my January notebook page. Downstream dependency conflict? Too vague. Separate childcare/transit/eldercare? The date was visible in the corner. January 12th. Claire stared at the screen. Then came MOPS. My ridiculous private phrase. Manager-owned predictability shift. Professor Foster read it aloud with the faintest trace of confusion. I almost wished the floor would open. Even in the middle of vindication, embarrassment survived. Dr. Reed showed my handwritten note from January 17th. MOPS? Maybe manager-owned predictability shift, terrible acronym, do not use. Then he showed page 22 of Claire's submitted draft. The paper used the full phrase. Professor Foster looked at me. Did you ever share this notebook page with Ms. Morgan? No. Did you ever use that phrase in a class discussion? No. In a shared document? Not that I can find. It was a private working note. She looked at Claire. Ms. Morgan? Claire's voice was quieter now. Elena and I talked constantly. It is possible she said it and forgot. Professor Foster made a note. Possible. Do you remember her saying it? Claire paused. I remember discussing the concept. That was not my question. Silence. Then Claire said, I can't remember the exact wording. The panel moved on. The Henderson citation came next. Claire's paper cited Henderson, 2018, for a finding that actually came from Hendricks, 2017. My February 28 local draft contained the same error. My handwritten revision list from March 4 said, fix Hendricks citation, not Henderson 2018. A corrected citation appeared in the final version of my abandoned thesis file, saved March 6 at 8:31 p.m. Claire's March 7 paper retained the old mistake. Professor Foster leaned back. Ms. Morgan, did you independently make the same miscitation? Claire's advisor objected to the phrasing as argumentative. Professor Foster rephrased. How did Henderson, 2018 enter your draft? Claire looked at the paper. I would have to check my notes. Do your submitted notes contain Henderson? Dr. Reed answered after checking the index. They do not. Claire's fingers pressed into the edge of the table. Then came the shared folder access log. This part was not dramatic either. It did not show Claire opening a file called Elena_thesis_steal_this. It showed repeated access to shared materials on the exact night before her paper appeared. Access alone did not prove copying. But beside the other evidence, it gave the chronology weight. Professor Foster finally asked Claire to explain, in her own words, how the 31-page paper had been produced. Claire took a drink of water. She began with collaboration. Elena and I have been sharing ideas for months. I understand now that our boundaries were not clear enough, but I genuinely believed the framework was something we had developed through ongoing conversations. Professor Foster asked, if it was jointly developed, why did you submit it under your name alone? Claire blinked. Our theses are individual projects. Then what portion was individually yours? The writing. The synthesis. The argument. Dr. Reed placed 2 passages on the screen. One from my February draft. One from Claire's March submission. The second changed some punctuation and replaced 3 words. Otherwise, they were identical. Claire stopped speaking. Professor Foster asked, did you write this paragraph independently? Claire looked at me. Not at the panel. At me. There was accusation in her face now, but beneath it something else. Panic. The old part of me responded automatically. I wanted to rescue her from the silence. I wanted to soften the moment, add context, say that we had discussed the underlying article, make the room less cruel. I gripped the paper cup harder. Her silence was not mine to fix. Claire looked back at the panel. I may have had that passage in my notes from something Elena shared. Professor Foster asked, "Did you cite Ms. Brooks?" No. Did you tell Professor Pierce the passage originated in material Ms. Brooks shared? No. Did you have permission to submit it as your own writing? Claire's voice dropped. We didn't have formal permission rules between us. Something moved across Professor Pierce's face. Disappointment, maybe. Claire saw it. Her composure finally cracked. This is being framed like I broke into her computer, she said. She gave me things. She always gave me things. We worked together constantly. I didn't think she was going to suddenly turn around and claim every idea belonged only to her. Priya touched my wrist under the table, a silent reminder not to respond unless asked. Professor Foster remained calm. No one is accusing you of breaking into a computer. We are examining what you submitted under your own name. Claire's breathing quickened. You don't understand. Elena changes things all the time. She can rebuild this. She already did. She has another thesis. The room became very still. Claire seemed to hear herself 1 second too late. Her advisor whispered, "Claire." But Claire kept going. My fellowship nomination depends on this. My applications depend on it. She is still going to graduate. She is still Professor Pierce's strongest student. One topic does not define her future the way this could define mine. There it was. The sentence she had said privately, now stripped of friendship and panic and placed in a room built for evidence. One topic does not define her future. As if the ability to survive theft converted theft into a lesser offense. Professor Foster looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "A student's resilience is not permission to appropriate her work." Claire closed her mouth. No one gasped. No one needed to. The hearing continued for another hour. I answered questions about what I had shared. I admitted freely that I had given Claire articles, reading notes, coding headers, and limited peer feedback access. I explained that I had never understood those acts as transferring authorship. Professor Foster asked why I changed topics the night before workshop. I told the truth. I realized I no longer wanted my graduation to depend on proving ownership of a project whose boundaries I had allowed to become too porous. I wanted a project I could document and complete independently. Did you change topics because you knew Ms. Morgan intended to submit the scheduling paper? I paused. This was the hardest question. I could not say I had died once already. I could not say I knew exactly what she would bring to class. So I stayed with what could be proven. I was concerned by how urgently she asked for my outline that night and by how often she accessed the shared folder. I decided I did not want to share more work or remain dependent on that topic. That was true. Professor Foster nodded. At 5:16, the hearing ended. The panel said a written determination would follow. I stepped into the hallway feeling hollow. My mother was waiting by the elevators. I had told her not to come. She came anyway. She stood when she saw me. Well, they haven't decided yet. Then we eat. I laughed, and the laugh turned into a sob halfway through. She wrapped her arms around me. For 1 minute, I was allowed to be 21. Not strategic. Not careful. Not the keeper of a timeline. Just her daughter. The decision arrived 2 days later. I was in the library working on my new thesis when the email appeared. My hands froze over the keyboard. I clicked it. The panel found that the preponderance of evidence supported my independent authorship of the original dynamic scheduling project. It found that Claire had incorporated substantial portions of my written analysis, research structure, and original coding framework into her submission without attribution and had misrepresented the development history of that work during the review. The panel found no academic misconduct by me. I read that sentence 4 times. No academic misconduct by Elena Brooks. My vision blurred. The rest of the decision outlined Claire's consequences. Her thesis submission was invalidated. She would be permitted to complete a replacement project under enhanced supervision if she wished to graduate that term, but the plagiarism finding would be reported through the university's standard academic integrity process. Her departmental fellowship nomination was withdrawn because the nomination required good academic standing. Any external graduate program disclosures would follow university policy and the application's own reporting requirements. There was no lifetime ban. No theatrical destruction. No dean announcing that Claire would never work in academia again. Just real consequences attached to real decisions. I closed the laptop and put my forehead against my folded arms. For several minutes, I did not move. I had imagined this moment for years in my first life. In those fantasies, I always felt triumphant. Claire cried. Everyone apologized. The universe admitted I had been right. Reality was quieter. Mostly, I felt tired. Then free. Professor Pierce asked me to meet the following Monday. When I entered her office, she handed me my new thesis draft covered in comments. Your methods section is still trying to claim more than your evidence supports. I stared at her. She raised an eyebrow. What? I started laughing. Professor Pierce smiled despite herself. I assume that is relief. Yes. Good. Be relieved for 30 seconds. Then fix page 12. I laughed harder. She waited. Then her expression became serious. Elena, I owe you an apology for one thing. My smile faded. I should have paid closer attention to how quickly Claire's project changed. Faculty cannot detect every authorship problem before students submit, but I had enough context to ask more questions in workshop. You did ask questions. Not soon enough to prevent a formal dispute. I thought about the first life. The version of Professor Pierce who had looked exhausted and uncertain, who had not known which student to believe. I had hated her for that. Now I understood something uncomfortable. Evidence had not existed in a neat pile waiting for her then. I had expected her intuition to save me from boundaries I had never created. That wasn't your job alone, I said. She nodded once. No. But it was part of it. Then she slid another paper across the desk. It was a letter. A revised recommendation for graduate study. I had not submitted the final version yet, she said. Your application portal deadline is next week, correct? I stared at the page. In my first life, losing her recommendation had closed the last door. Yes. I cannot promise admission. But I can accurately say that you handled a difficult research integrity process with exceptional care, rebuilt your project under severe time pressure, and produced independent work. My eyes burned. Thank you. Do not thank me until you fix page 12. I smiled. Yes, Professor. Claire and I spoke one final time before graduation. It happened outside the department office in April. She had changed. Not into a ruined person. Not into a monster finally revealed. She simply looked exhausted and smaller without the constant certainty that everyone would rearrange themselves around her needs. She had completed a replacement thesis on wellness program participation using a narrow review of existing literature. It was not brilliant. It did not need to be. She would graduate without departmental honors. When she saw me, she stopped. I considered walking past. Then she said, "I'm sorry." I waited. She swallowed. I know that probably means nothing. It means what you do after it. Her eyes dropped. My dad says I should appeal. Are you going to? No. I did not congratulate her. Accepting consequences was not a gift to me. Claire looked toward the stairwell. I really did think you would be okay. The sentence might once have destroyed me. Now it only made me sad. I know. I thought you were better at recovering than I was. I was. She looked at me. That doesn't make what you took worth less. Her eyes filled, but she did not argue. For once, I did not comfort her. I did not hate her either. I simply let the silence belong to both of us. Then I left. My new thesis was 48 pages when I submitted it in May. Not the longest in the cohort. Not the most ambitious. Professor Pierce made me cut an entire section because I kept drifting from policy incentives into claims about student behavior that my data could not support. I complained for 2 days. Then I admitted she was right. The final project argued something narrower and better. Scholarship renewal rules create predictable incentives around course load and withdrawal decisions, and those incentives can impose unequal constraints on students who must balance paid work with enrollment requirements. Every table was mine. Every citation trail was mine. Every awkward paragraph I rewrote at 2 in the morning was mine. When I uploaded the final PDF, the system displayed my name beneath the file. Elena Brooks. I stared at it until Tessa leaned over my shoulder. You know it's submitted, right? I know. You look like you're witnessing a moon landing. Kind of feels like one. She handed me a cheap sparkling cider she had hidden under her desk. To boundaries, she said. I laughed. To citations. To never editing another adult's paper at midnight. That one too. A week later, an email arrived from the graduate program that had been my first choice. I opened it with my mother on video call. For a terrible second, I could not read past the first line. Then the words settled into meaning. I had been admitted. Not with the exact fellowship package I had imagined in my first life. Something better for the person I had become. A research assistantship that covered tuition and included a stipend for work on higher education policy. My mother screamed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Tessa ran in from the hallway thinking something was wrong. I started crying before I could explain. At graduation, I wore a plain black gown over a blue dress my mother had bought on sale. Professor Pierce shook my hand on stage. My mother stood in the crowd taking blurry photographs because she refused to use the Zoom correctly. Claire crossed the same stage 40 minutes later. I watched without anger. Her life had not ended. Mine had not needed hers to. That was the part one could never understand in my first life. Justice did not require me to spend the rest of my future measuring the size of her punishment. It required the truth to stop living on my back. In August, I moved into a tiny apartment near my new university. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person to turn around without hitting the refrigerator. The bedroom window faced a brick wall. I loved it immediately. On my first night there, I unpacked my old notebooks. The dynamic scheduling thesis was still on my laptop. I had kept it. For months, I had not known what to do with it. Delete it? Finish it someday? Pretend it had never existed? I opened the folder one last time. The old title appeared on the screen. The Cost of Convenience. I thought about the girl who had written it the first time. She had believed kindness meant unlimited access. She had believed being capable meant she should carry more. She had believed that if someone she loved panicked loudly enough, their emergency automatically became her responsibility. I did not despise her anymore. She had survived the only way she knew how. I created an archive folder and moved the old thesis inside. Then I closed it. On my desk sat a printed copy of my new paper. My name was on the first page. Only my name. The night I was reborn, I thought changing my thesis topic was a retreat. I thought I was walking away from something Claire had taken. I understand it differently now. I was not giving up my work. I was giving up the position I had occupied in everyone else's life, the person whose time could be borrowed, whose notes could be shared, whose talent could be used, whose future could be risked because she was smart enough to recover. The new topic saved more than my degree. It taught me that a boundary does not become selfish simply because someone else is inconvenienced by it. It taught me that evidence is not cynicism. It taught me that helping someone and becoming responsible for them are not the same thing. And most of all, it taught me that my life did not have to be built around proving Claire had stolen from me. She became part of my past. The work ahead became larger. That fall, I walked into my first graduate research seminar with a new notebook under my arm. The professor asked us to introduce ourselves and describe the question we most wanted to study. When my turn came, I did not talk about plagiarism. I did not talk about hearings. I did not talk about Claire. I talked about institutions, incentives, and the invisible rules that shape who gets to keep moving forward when life becomes expensive. The professor nodded and asked a follow-up question. I opened my notebook. The first page was blank. For once, that did not scare me. It felt like mine.